Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, fantasy freaks and geeks? Welcome to the part one of the Week 8 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. It has been an insane past couple of weeks for me, so it's been almost a full week since I've put out an episode here. I missed the second half of last week's episode, so I very much apologize for that, but I am changing up the format a little here for this week, trying something out new here, and hopefully it works out. So basically what I did was I went through and I essentially made my own rankings, but I didn't, I'm not going to sit here and say I got this guy at number 8 and this guy at number 10. What I did was I found the top 24 running backs, the top 24 wide receivers, the top 12 tight ends, and then the top 12 flexes. So the next best 12 options, in my opinion. And then obviously I also went through and picked out the 12 quarterbacks that I would feel comfortable with playing this week. So basically, I'm going to go through each game like I have been, but I'm maybe not going to spend as much time on each game. I'm going to try and just get through the players that I think are startable and the players that I'm going to sit. Obviously, I will dive into those guys as well, but just not as much in depth. Maybe hopefully get through these games a little quicker. So this episode, we're going to do the NFC home games, starting with the Thursday night game, the Redskins at the Vikings. And then part 2, which will come out tomorrow, will be the AFC home games. So we're going to get started here with the Redskins at the Vikings. And so far, going through this game, the only thing I can say about this game is revenge. Yes, a sweet game of revenge. There's a triple-decker game of revenge here. Both quarterbacks played for the opposite team. We got Case Keenum going up against the Vikings, and Kirk Cousins going up against the Redskins. These two quarterbacks, they switched teams 2 years ago, and I think it's a intriguing matchup. And then we also got, obviously, Adrian Peterson, the Hall of Famer to be, playing against his old team. And he's kind of really, besides Terry McLaurin, he's kind of really their only other legitimate option there in the offense. So looking at the Redskins coming off of that ugly 0-9 game in which it was raining cats and dogs out there, it was a pretty rough-looking game. So I'm kind of throwing out everything from that game, and I'm going off of what I've seen from the rest of the season with this team, and I don't know why anyone would sit Terry McLaurin right now. 2 weeks ago, actually, in one of my leagues, I played against a guy, and he sat Terry McLaurin for, I think it was Larry Fitzgerald, and those 13 or 14 fantasy points that he missed out on would have been enough to beat me. So thank you for sitting Terry McLaurin. That was lovely for me. But he's got to stay in your lineup. Last week was the only game this year where he had under 7 targets. It was one of the toughest matchups in football, playing against San Francisco, plus the whole weather side of the game. So don't be discouraged by that one game. I think he's a stud. I think he's, that undrafted rookie free agent that seems like every year there's one of these guys that comes out of nowhere and earns a spot in the league for sure. So I like him, looking at, like I said, Adrian Peterson, I think he's an awesome FanDuel play, especially. I think that revenge element is going to be pretty strong for Adrian Peterson in this game. I think it was 2 years ago when he was on the Saints for that 3 or 4 game stretch, whatever it was. They played the Vikings, and I think he was pretty upset that he didn't get to get a full workload in that game. So I think the Redskins, with the situation that they're in, with the coaching situation, the quarterback situation, I think they're just gonna feed Adrian Peterson the ball in this one. Minnesota's run defense is pretty good. They give up the sixth fewest fantasy points to running backs. However, they're in the top 3 as far as receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. I know catching the ball is something that Adrian Peterson has never really done a lot of. It's something that he does here and there, and he gets his targets, but he's definitely on the lower end of targeted top tier running backs. So I don't know if it's something that the Redskins are going to try and focus on, but you look at a defense as good as theirs, and you got to find weaknesses somewhere. Their weakness right now is definitely against wide receivers. Their secondary is not as good as we thought it was going to be, and that's all the more reason to play Terry McLaurin. So those are the 2 guys I would be interested in on the Redskins. With the Vikings, obviously it's Kirk Cousins, who also is feeling a little bit of
revenge.
Yes, and he's playing awesome, man. 3 straight 300-plus yard games, 10 touchdowns in those 3 games. You can't really ask for any more than that, man. I think I saw he's got a QB rating of like over 120 for the past 3 games, which is just wild. So this is definitely a great week to play him. Looking at the 2 teams that are on bye this week, it's the Cowboys and Ravens. So, if you're one of the Lamar Jackson owners, or if you've been rocking with Dak Prescott, if Kirk Cousins is available, you definitely want to play him this week for sure. Dalvin Cook is a must-start, obviously. He's top 3, top 5 running back, so you're going to play him every week. Stephon Diggs, 3 or 4 games now with over 100 yards and at least 7 targets. He's got a good matchup, too. The Redskins are in the top 10 as far as fantasy points allowed to wide receivers as well. So, Adam Thielen is most likely going to win. All signs are pointing that, or going to sit. Most likely is not going to play. And honestly, I think if you're a Adam Thielen owner and you kind of get stuck Thursday night, and it's he's not playing, and you're looking at the waiver wire and you're not liking anybody, I think this BC Johnson isn't the worst replacement. Like I said, the Vikings are giving up the 10th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Kirk Cousins is definitely going to be feeling that small little
revenge.
Yes. So it's got to be somebody to throw the ball to besides Diggs. So 8 targets last week for him. He did catch a touchdown. He had a couple red zone targets. So, like I said, if you're stuck trying to figure out a replacement for Adam Thielen, BC Johnson's not the worst play. I don't think so. Moving on to the Cardinals at the Saints. We got Kyler Murray, who's was a disappointing game last week, but he's got a good matchup here. Saints are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. And dudes with that much talent running the ball, we're waiting for that huge 100-plus yard rushing game. I think he had a 91-yard game a couple weeks ago. To me, if you go back and listen to last year, I was all about Lamar Jackson. I love Josh Allen this year because what these guys can do running the ball is huge, and it just makes their ceiling just massive. So one of these dudes breaks off a 60-yard touchdown. That's 12 points for you right there. So I like Kyler Murray, even though his team is kind of falling apart here. First they were down Christian Kirk, and then David Johnson is now dealing with some injuries. He may not play, but Chase Edmonds came in and he played wonderfully. He had a 3-touchdown, 150-yard game on 30 touches last week. I think if David Johnson is out for this game, Chase Edmonds is definitely at least an RB2. So you definitely want to play him. Even if David Johnson is pronounced as a starter like he was last week, he came in and he played 3 snaps, got 1 carry, and then they took him out. So even if he's active, I would still play Chase Edmonds because it seems like they're going to take their time with him. They're not going to risk more injury with this guy. He's way too important to this team. Looking at the Saints, you got Teddy Bridgewater, another guy with a great matchup. The Cardinals give up the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. He's got 7 touchdowns and 1 interception in his last 3 games. Plus, it seems like him and Michael Thomas have developed a connection. Michael Thomas, 3 straight games with double-digit targets. Alvin Kamara is a must-play if he's healthy. I don't care if he's only going to get 50% of what he got last year. The dude is special. It only takes one play for him to bust it out for a 30, 40, 50-yard touchdown to make playing him worth it. So if he's active, you play him. And Latavius Murray, I think obviously if Kamara is out, you play Latavius Murray again. Last week he had 2 touchdowns. He also had 150 yards on 30 touches. So 2 backup running backs that played really well last week that I think are in good positions this week to also play well. And I think it's obviously a little more dependent with Latavius Murray on whether or not Alvin Kamara plays. But if Kamara is out, you definitely play Murray. And if Kamara is in, that's a tough call. I think it's going to be dependent on your roster and the situation that you're in. I love pumpkin beer. It's so delicious. All right. Next game is the Bengals at the Rams. Joe Mixon is a sit for me. He's got 50 total yards in his past 2 games combined. There's no rushing touchdowns this year. The only touchdowns he did score were 2 receiving touchdowns. One of them was last week. That completely saved his fantasy day. So I'm sitting him. It's not working out for him right now. So he's got to sit on the bench for a couple weeks until he can prove that he can take advantage of the opportunity that he has. Tyler Boyd, definitely worth a flex spot if you ask me. Only caught 5 of his 14 targets last week, which I think is kind of keeping him out of being one of those consistent keeping your lineup kind of guys because his catch rate is not that great. And the Rams are a pretty tough matchup against wide receivers. They are allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. So, but he is their best receiver, and on a team where their defense is pretty bad, they are finding themselves on the bad end of a lot of game scripts. So, any dude who's getting 14 targets, you keep him in your lineup. So, I think Tyler Boyd should be kept in as a flex for sure. Somewhat of a revenge game for head coach Zach Taylor, who was an offensive coordinator with the Rams. Maybe he's got a little extra juice to kind of show his old team that he can branch off on his own and be okay. Alex Erickson, this team 137 yards on 8 catches for 14 targets last week, and then Auden Tate 91 yards on 11 targets the week before. I think this offense can support a second wide receiver. It's just, trying to figure out which one of these guys it's going to be week to week has been impossible. So I'm staying away from them until AJ Green gets back, and then hopefully AJ Green takes over as the other pass catcher for the Bengals here. So moving over to the Rams, Jared Goff, he's a start this week as well with all these QB injuries and the 2 guys that are on bye. Todd Gurley, 2 straight games with 18 touches. He's got the best running back matchup this year. The Rams are allowing the most fantasy points to running back, so definitely keep him in your lineup. The Bengals secondary is actually the strength of their defense, so another tough week for these Rams wide receivers they've all struggled this year. They've all, except for the couple big games by Cooper Kupp, they've all pretty much underperformed. I think what we've been expecting, at least over the past few weeks. So I'm still going to start Kupp. I'm still going to start Robert Woods. The one guy I think I'm going to get away from is Brandon Cooks and Gerald Everett too. I know looking through all my leagues, I saw a couple leagues. I saw guys had Gerald Everett in their lineup. The Bengals are actually allowing the 9th fewest fantasy points to tight end, so I'm going to stay away from Gerald Everett. I think there's way too many other options at tight end to go with. So. And I think the back and forth of Gerald Everett's production over the past 3 weeks, I think, has been solely dependent on their matchup. So, and like I said, this is not a good one, so I'm staying away from him. All right, so we got the Chargers playing the Bears. So I'm sitting Phillip Rivers if I have him, and actually one of my leagues that my starter all year has been Lamar Jackson. He's on bye. I either had to play Phillip Rivers as my backup this week, or Kirk Cousins was available on the waiver wire, so I went out and grabbed him. Rivers just has looked old over these past couple weeks. It's weird, man. The beginning of the season, they were killing it. And then it kind of seems like since Melvin Gordon came back, this offense has just not looked the same at all. It's kind of wild. So, like I said, I'm staying away from Phillip Rivers. Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler are both RB2s this week, with the Bears allowing the 10th most fantasy points to running backs. Surprising, actually, that their run defense is not as good as the defense as a whole. So as long as Eckler continues to get 7 to 8 targets a game, I'm going to play him. He only got, I think, 3 or 4, maybe 5 carries last week. What was it? Here we go. Melvin Gordon, 5 carries for 7 yards last week. So Melvin Gordon is definitely eating into his share of the carries, but Austin Eckler with 8 targets last week and 118 receiving yards with that touchdown. He caught that nice long pass. So he's going to continue to be used in the passing game, I'm assuming, and because of that, I'm going to continue to play him. Keenan Allen last week with his first double-digit target game since Week 3. Hasn't had a 100-yard game or a touchdown since Week 3. Tough matchup, but you still play him because he's their best receiver. He's one of the best players on that offense, and he's their number one. So although Mike Williams and Hunter Henry will really eat into his opportunities going forward, now that Hunter Henry seems like he's healthy and he's solidified his role in this offense, I don't think we're going to see another Keenan Allen 15, 16 target game like we saw in the beginning of the season, but hopefully he can pick it up. He's had a couple rough games in a row now. Like I said, Mike Williams, I think he's also a flex, averaging 9 targets a game since he missed Week 4. Still no touchdowns, but I think with that target share on that offense, with the other players that he's playing with, I think they'll come. The TDs will eventually get going here. And I like both of those wide receivers. And then obviously Hunter Henry, 3 yards short of back-to-back 100-yard games last week. Rivers trusts him, and he will continue to look his way. Throughout Phillip Rivers' career, he's done 2 things. He loves to throw the ball to his running backs, and he loves to throw the ball to his tight ends, especially in the red zone. In the one league that I have Hunter Henry, he's in the past 2 games, since he's come off of IR, he's really kind of saved my season. So I'm loving Hunter Henry going forward for the rest of the season for sure. Beer. All right, we got the Giants playing the Lions here. Obviously, Saquon Barkley is a must-play every week. Evan Ingram under 8 fantasy points in the last 3 games, and that's in half PPR leagues. He had the best matchup in fantasy football last week. Tight ends against the Cardinals have absolutely destroyed the Cardinals. But he caught just 1 of his 5 targets for 6 yards. I know in the second half he got poked in the eye or something, but definitely disappointing. On FanDuel, I actually had a couple parlays in, and I threw in the prop bet for anytime touchdown score. I thought, it's a lock that this dude's going to score a touchdown against this insanely bad Cardinals defense, and he did not. So he kind of screwed me, but that's all right. The other interesting player here for the Giants is Golden Tate. Why?
Revenge.
Yes, Golden Tate spent the first half of his career with the Detroit Lions until he was traded to the Philadelphia Eagles last year. 20 targets in the last 2 weeks. He's really come in and solidified himself as a go-to receiver for rookie Daniel Jones. He's definitely a wide receiver too while Shepard is out and Ingram is struggling. I think in this game the Lions are going to put up some points because this Giants defense is not very good, so I think the Giants are going to have to keep up with the Lions offense, and I like Golden Tate a lot this week, so definitely get him in your lineup. With the Lions, Matthew Stafford, no Kerryon Johnson going forward until at least week 16. I think Matthew Stafford might go out there and just throw for 400 yards or something crazy because this Giants defense is horrible. Kenny Golladay is still a top wide receiver despite the bad game that he had last week. What did he do last week? 1 catch on 2 targets for 21 yards. Meanwhile, fellow teammates like Marvin Jones are going off for 4 touchdowns on 13 targets, and Danny Amendola catching 8 of his 11 targets for 105 yards. I think Amendola's increased usage last week was a direct result of Kerryon Johnson going down. So because of that, I think Danny Amendola is worth a flex play this week with no Kerryon. And this matchup with the Giants. Giants are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Like I said, 11 targets last week. You can, in a PPR, whether it's half, full, 75%, whatever, he's worth playing. Another interesting cat in this game, Ty Johnson. Now that Kerryon Johnson is gone, I think it's going to be Ty Johnson and J.D. McKissick are probably going to be splitting carries, splitting touches. We'll see who takes advantage of their opportunity with that one. But the Giants are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to running backs. They're also allowing the most receptions and the most receiving yards to running backs. Throwing the ball to running backs is something that Matthew Stafford has done very well over his career. So I think both of these guys are going to see a little uptick in value. If there's one of them that I would prefer to play, I think it's Ty Johnson. In a league that I had Kerryon Johnson, that I had to drop him. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get Ty Johnson, but I was able to get J.D. McKissick. So I'm hoping that both of these guys can come in and become fantasy starters for us. So, and like I said, it's a great matchup for him. So he's going to get the opportunity. He's got the good matchup. Let's throw him out there and see what happens. All right, the Seattle Seahawks playing the Atlanta Falcons. Still not sure as of right now whether or not Matt Ryan is going to play, if it's going to be either him or Matt Schaub. Matt Schaub came in last week, and he went 6 for 6 and threw a touchdown. Didn't look absolutely horrible. And if he's going to kind of keep this trend of backup quarterbacks playing well going, then, should be okay. Devontae Freeman, however, is a sit for me. He hasn't been playing well. This Falcons team hasn't been playing well. They find themselves in the hole so much. They get out of game scripts in which they can kind of rely on Devontae Freeman as something more than just a pass catcher. And plus, he got thrown out of the game last week for throwing a punch at Aaron Donald wearing a helmet. To me, it's just, how dumb are you? First of all, why are you picking a fight with Aaron Donald? Second of all, why are you trying to punch a dude that's wearing a helmet? The only thing that's going to happen from that is you looking like an idiot. So I'm not playing Devontae Freeman. Julio Jones, however, is a must-start every week. I don't care who their quarterback is. It's Julio Jones. Every year he has 1 or 2 of those huge games, and just you don't want to be a fool that sits Julio Jones or Tyreek Hill this week because they're going to be playing with a backup quarterback. So don't do it. Just keep him in your lineup. You take your lumps with Matt Schaub if he does play, and if not, you got Matt Ryan with Julio Jones and no Mohamed Sanu, who was traded to the Patriots. So obviously we're going to see some of those targets have to get redistributed. So Mohamed Sanu is leaving his 15% target share behind. I assume Calvin Ridley would see the majority of that. I think some of those are going to go to Austin Hooper. Some of them are going to go to Julio Jones. But I think this really helps clear up this offense for us. The passing game is going to run through Julio, Calvin Ridley, and Austin Hooper. Again, Austin Hooper, I think he's a play as well. Seattle is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends, so he's got a good matchup, and he's only going to see more targets with Mohamed Sanu gone. And if Matt Schaub does play, I think the one position that is affected the least by a backup quarterback coming in is the tight end position. I think if there's one thing that every quarterback in the league should be able to do, whether you're a second, first, or third stringer, is be able to get the ball to your tight end, especially a dude as big and athletic and just good as Austin Hooper. So I like him again. I've been all about him all season. He's been playing well. I think he's a top 5 or 6 tight end so far in the season. So looking at the Seahawks, Russell Wilson is a top 3 quarterback. You're playing him every week. He's in MVP contention. Don't ever sit him. especially this week. He's probably the number one quarterback this week playing the Falcons, who allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Tyler Lockett is on his way to another solid wide receiver 2 season. Play him in this matchup as well. The Falcons allow the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Last week we saw with Will Dissly out, DK Metcalf got a season-high 9 targets. I think that's going to continue. He's a big body guy. I think it might be something that they try and explore more with him, using him in the slot and not necessarily as a dude just running deep. So I think he's worth a flex. And then an interesting tight end option is this Jacob Hollister. The Seahawks traded for him 2 weeks ago. He saw 6 targets last week. What did he do with those 6 targets? He caught 3 of them for 20 yards, so you'd like to see a little bit better than that. But again, with this Falcons defense, they're allowing the 9th most fantasy points to tight ends, and that's a position that Russell Wilson has shown throughout his career, no matter who it is, that he will get you. He'll get you the ball. You get yourself open, and he'll hit you. So maybe he falls into the end zone, gets you one of those cheap streaming tight end touchdowns, those ever so valuable streaming tight end touchdowns. And the last NFC home game here of the week, we got the Panthers playing at the 49ers. Panthers coming off of a bye. Honestly, if I'm going to be putting in a bet this week on FanDuel, I'm going to be throwing the under for this game into my parlay. 2 really good defenses. Christian McCaffrey is a top 5 must play every week. I don't care that he's playing the 2nd-ranked run defense of the San Francisco 49ers. Christian McCaffrey is a special dude. You play him every week. I think both DJ Moore and Curtis Samuels are wide receiver 2s this week, despite the 5th best secondary against wide receivers. I think they both can give you 10 points, whether that's by catching 7 to 8 passes and maybe 40 yards or whatever. I think Kyle Allen has shown the ability to get the ball out quick, which he's going to have to do against this 49ers defensive line that loves to rush the passer. And in PPR leagues, like the one that we talk about on this podcast, half-point PPR is the format that, the go-to format for us. You catch, if you're going to see 10 targets and you're going to catch 6 or 7 of them and maybe get 30, 40 yards, what else could you ask for a wide receiver 2 that's got a really tough matchup in a week where you have a bunch of other dudes that are on bye. So I like both of them going forward as well. I'm sitting Greg Olsen against this 49ers defense. They allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to tight ends. Greg Olsen has been very up and down this season, so I'm staying away from him. On the 49ers side, Telvin Coleman, Matt Breida are both running back 2s because of the 49ers offensive line and the fact that they run the ball over 55% of the time with a top defense. All the elements that it takes to make to give a running back good value. Been involved in trade talks with one guy in one of my leagues. He's trying to get Breida from me. He wants Tyreek Hill and Matt Breida to give me Emmanuel Sanders and Austin Eckler. I think it's a little too much to ask for. We're still in negotiations, so Kev, let's figure this one out, bro. Let's help each other out. George Kittle is a top 3 talent at tight end. Yes, he's having a down year compared to what he did last year, but a guy as talented as that, he's a must start every week. And on a team or in a game that a lot of the other position players might struggle against this defense, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo kind of relies on the good old tight end spot for him this week. The 49ers are another team that went out and made a big trade. They went out and got Emmanuel Sanders, who I love in this deal. I think it really helps out Sanders' value. He is going to be the best wide receiver on the roster now, and he seems kind of like a perfect fit for Kyle Shanahan, who loves versatile players. He loves wide receivers that can run the jet motions, that can run deep routes, crossers, that can, run slants and screens and everything else. And I think Emmanuel Sanders fits that team perfectly. I think we're going to see plenty of end arounds and wide receiver passes and all kinds of cool stuff with him. So I'm definitely excited. I think he's worth a flex this week, solely just because he's going to be stepping right into being, one of the best players on the team. So I don't care that he doesn't know the playbook. Doesn't matter. Kyle Shanahan's a good enough coach where, they'll come up with some kind of system to, get him a crash course on the playbook, and he'll put him in positions to succeed. I think Kyle Shanahan has shown the ability to plug and play guys. You look at the running back situation on that team. They've had 5 different dudes have over 10 fantasy points this season. So he knows what he's doing, and I think it's a matchup where they're going to have to use every talented player that they have. The Panthers' defense is pretty good in its own right. So should be an awesome game there for us. So thanks for tuning in to the Part 1 episode of the Week 8 Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure you tune in make sure you tune in tomorrow for Part 2 when we go through all of the AFC home games. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.